Hello? Hey, baby. You sound so tired. Angel, did I wake you up? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm calling so late. Yeah, I have no idea why it was so busy tonight. I mean, it's not even good weather. I don't know why the customers couldn't have just been slow and let me enjoy the rain, but you know it never works like that. I swear I just came home and took a shower and then called you. Is this a bad time? Okay. Yeah, I guess it is already past your bedtime. Not that you have a bedtime, but I do too know when you go to bed. Come on. I call you every night. That's the least I could do. With all the times you've fallen asleep with me on the phone, you don't think I'd remember? Right. And your bedtime was approximately 30 minutes ago. You sure you don't want to just go back to sleep? No, I'd happily stay on the call and wait for you to go back to sleep, Angel. It's nice to hear from you after a long day, you know? You make it a lot better. Yeah, I mean, work today was fine. It was busy, but it wasn't super stressful. I mean, everyone else showed up on time, and it wasn't that bad. It's just exhausting, you know? How was your day? How'd work go? Mm-hmm. Is that the same one as yesterday? No? Okay. Yeah. Sounds like you had an exhausting day, too. I like the picture you sent me, though. Right, I mean, it's cute that your grocery store decided to have a little pride section, but that has to be the tackiest thing I've ever seen. Yeah, it made me laugh at work. I'm glad you sent it to me. My grocery store is much less exciting. No, I didn't get any good thunderstorms. I know, that's what I was hoping for. I wanted it to be like hard rain, some thunderstorms. I love listening to that. No, it was just wet all day, just kind of miserable. But I don't mind it. It's watering the plants. Yeah. Everything's about plants with me. Speaking of plants, don't laugh at me. Speaking of plants, you know the monstera I sent you a picture of last night? Yeah, that little leaf. It's almost coming out. I'm so excited. It doesn't look like it's that big, but it looks like it has a lot of holes in it. So I think it's happy. I know. I'll have to send you another picture. And I put its aerial roots in some water earlier, just to see what would happen. I mean, they ground it in the dirt, but I just stuck a little mason jar in the I stuck a little mason jar in the dirt and then kind of put the aerial roots in there, and I'm hoping maybe that'll give me some more new leaves. I've also been wiping down the leaves every single day. I treat that plant like a baby. Okay, well, you're right. I do. But babies don't look as cool. You know I'm funny. Is that a yawn? You're already bored of talking to me? No, baby. I'm just kidding. You know, one day you'll be able to come and see my monstera plant. And you won't just have to look at pictures of it, you know? One day you'll be able to come sit on my couch and see the things I tell you about every night. you can stop by my work, and you can, I feel like you know so much about everything that I do, but you've never seen it. And I'm so excited to show it all to you one day. Yes, and I also really, really, really want to kiss you, which is a little hard to do over the phone. I can always go. Did you like that one? Right. Doesn't sound that good over a phone. One day. So what else did you do today? Besides work, or did you just come home? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds a little exciting. Not the most exciting. Could be more exciting. Would have been more exciting if I was there, but sounds like a pretty good day nonetheless. I'm glad. You deserve to have good days. And to have pretty things and smiles and everything else, I can be as cheesy as I want, and you know what? You can't stop me. You can do nothing to stop. No. Okay. I guess you could hang up. Hypothetically, you could. Please don't. Please? Please, Angel, don't hang up on me. Okay, I'm sorry. Speaking of that little pride display, kind of, I've been reading some of the books I bought recently. I finished the one that was just about, gay history in general. Yeah, The Gay Revolution. That's a great name for a book, by the way. And I've moved on to the one about trans history, which is really interesting because I feel like, I don't know anything about it. I feel like I should. I feel like it's a huge part of our community, and it's not talked about too much, Everyone knows a little bit of the history, but there's so much that goes into it, and I didn't realize that until I was reading this book. Yeah. It's definitely the month to be educating myself on stuff like this. If you want, I can mail it out to you. You'll have to mail it back, though, because I do like this book, and I want it back. Yeah, you're right. It would be a lot cheaper, a lot easier if I just read it to you. Do a little chapter a night kind of deal. I love reading to you. If you want, yeah, I can read to you tonight. Do you want me to read something a little more nighttime story, or do you want me to read this history book? You can't, you're allowed to fall asleep, but you can't fall asleep because it's boring. Because it's not boring. Yeah, that's a good reason to fall asleep. You're allowed to go to sleep, but I will be updating you on everything I read to you tomorrow. Because I want you to know it. Yeah, I think it's really nice to learn all this. Another yawn? I haven't yawned once, and I'm always tired. Okay. Are you all ready for bed? Teeth brushed, hair brushed, everything like that? Yeah? Okay. No, I am too. I don't think I have to do anything. I could be forgetting something, though, which would be very on par for me. No, I did that. Yeah, did that. Yeah, medicine. Plants. Yes, I did the plants. I think I did that. Did I? Yeah, yes, I did that. I did. You really remember everything I have to do at night? That's kind of heartwarming. We'll be able to do them together sometime. It doesn't sound super exciting to water my plants with me, but it's domestic. I want to do horribly domestic things with you. Just awfully domestic. I want to cook in an apron. I don't even own an apron, but I'll get one of those aprons that you could probably buy at Marshall's, or like that a 30-year-old mom would buy on Etsy. I want one of those that I can cook with you. I want to be domestic. I want to go rake leaves with you. Doesn't that sound fun? No? Well, I guess the point isn't that it's fun. The point is that it's not fun, but that we're doing it together. Okay, baby. Let me read to you. You sound so tired. And it's really cute, but I don't want to deprive you of any more sleep. No, I'm not quite ready to sleep yet, but I am very ready to help put you to sleep. Okay, let me see where I was. I think that was page 142. Yeah, so it kind of goes chronologically. So the beginning of the book was pretty old trans history, and it was a lot of terminology and understanding the background of a bunch of stuff. And now I'm in the 70s and the 80s, I think. I think I'm in the 70s and 80s. And the next chapter is the 90s forward. But the section I'm reading right now is specifically about communities of trans men, which I'm excited to read because, like I said, I want to know more of my history. But anyways, all right, snuggle up. You better grab that stuffed animal, get those pillows. Yeah, I know which pillow is your favorite. It's the one you keep on the right. No, I don't know what it looks like. You've never showed me, but I remember you talking about it. Okay. I'm going to start reading, and you are welcome to fall asleep. I will catch you up tomorrow, but go to sleep, baby. I'll read to you until you are deep asleep, and then I'll talk to you tomorrow, okay? Okay. I love you. I love you so much. Okay. The shifts in lesbian and feminist gender ideology that focused on woman identification and provided the conceptual underpinnings for some women to engage in transphobic attacks also encouraged some former butches and femmes to maintain the erotic dynamics of their relationships by leaving the homosexual subcultures they had once considered home and to blend into the dominant heteronormative population once the former butch had transitioned to live as a man. This is not to suggest that trans men would be lesbians given the opportunity, but rather to point out that as one possible way of life for transmasculine people was becoming less available, other possibilities were expanding. These changes in the cultural landscape unavoidably affected the life paths that many gender-questioning people followed. It's also important to note that not all trans men have a lesbian history, and that many people assigned female at birth who were oriented towards men also found their way into female-to-male communities in increasing numbers by the mid-1970s, and they sometimes embraced gay male identities as they continued to be involved with men after transitioning. Jude Patton with the Renaissance Group in Los Angeles, Rupert Raj of Toronto with his Metamorphosis magazine, provided support for hundreds of trans men in the 1970s and 1980s. In 1977, their fellow trans activists Mario Martino's memoir Emergence became the first full-length autobiography of a trans man to be published in the United States. one of the first media pieces to draw attention to civil injustices encountered by trans men, and a key moment in the politicization of a U.S. FTM community, involved Steve Dane, an award-winning former high school physical education teacher in Emeryville, California. In 1976, Dane had informed his principal that he would be transitioning genders during the school's summer vacation, and he asked to be reassigned to teach science rather than girls' gym. The request was granted, but because of a change in the school's administration, a new vice principal was unaware of Dane's plan. During the first day of classes, the administrator panicked when he learned that the new science teacher was none other than the old PE teacher, and he had Dane arrested in his classroom in front of his students for quote-unquote disturbing the peace. Dane successfully sued the Emeryville School District for a large but undisclosed sum, and subsequently left teaching to pursue a career as a chiropractor. He became a highly visible spokesperson for FTM issues, appearing in the 1985 HBO documentary What Sex Am I?, and serving as a lay counselor for many gender-questioning transmasculine people. One of Dane's most significant protégés was Lou Sullivan, who became the hub of the organized FTM community in the United States in the 1980s. Born in 1951, Sullivan started keeping a journal as a 10-year-old girl growing up in the Milwaukee suburbs, and continued journaling regularly until a few days before his untimely death at age 39 in 1991. In his journal, Sullivan described his early childhood thoughts of being a boy, his confusing adolescent sexual fantasies of being a gay man, and his teenage participation in Milwaukee's counterculture scene. He read John Rechy's novels and dreamed of running away to live with the drag queens of Los Angeles. By the time he graduated high school, he was dressing in men's clothing and was active in the Gay People's Union at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where he found a job as a secretary in the Slavic Languages Department. By 1973, Sullivan self-identified as a female transvestite who was sexually attracted to gay and bisexual men. That same year, he launched a career of transgender community activism with the publication of A Transvestite Answers a Feminist, an article that appeared in the GPU News, in which he recounted his conversations with a coworker who was critical of his masculine style of dress. The argument Sullivan laid out, that all people represent their sense of themselves to others by means of certain recognizable gender conventions, and that transgender representations of masculine or feminine identities are no more or no less stereotypical than those of anyone else, anticipated a line of thinking that became well established in transgender community discourses in the decades ahead. Another article, looking towards transvestite liberation, published in the GPU News in 1974, was widely reprinted in the gay and lesbian press. Sullivan continued to contribute reviews and articles to the GPU News through 1980, many of them historical vignettes of people assigned female at birth who lived their lives as men. In doing so, Sullivan became an important community-based historian of the FTM experience. Sullivan had come to self-identify as a female-to-male transsexual by 1975, and he moved to San Francisco to seek a medically assisted gender transition at the Stanford University Gender Dysphoria program. He found work as a woman as a secretary for the Wilson Sporting Goods Company, but he spent most of his non-working hours dressed as a young man, cruising the Castro's neighborhood's gay enclave for anonymous sex with men. In 1976, Sullivan was rejected by the Stanford program on the basis of his openly declared gay male identity, and he spent the next 4 years continuing to live as a woman. During these years in which he tried to make peace with his female embodiment, he participated in feminist consciousness-raising sessions, which he admits helped him work through some internalized misogyny but never caused him to waver in his gay male identity. Learned to repair cars in an effort to combat limiting field stereotypes, and became active in San Francisco Bay Area male-to-female cross-dresser groups, where he worked to develop peer support for female-to-male individuals. Sullivan had read and been inspired by the 1976 newspaper coverage of Steve Dane's tribulations, but he first had a chance to meet his hero in 1979 after meeting a psychotherapist at a cross-dresser support organization who happened to know Dane. Steve Dane offered Sullivan important validation and encouraged him to pursue transitioning as if it were what he really wanted to do. By 1979, as noted earlier, the framework for transgender medical services was shifting away from university-based research programs and becoming considerably more decentralized. As a result, Sullivan was able to find psychotherapists, endocrinologists, and surgeons in private practice who were not concerned with his identification as a gay man and who were willing to help him transition. Sullivan started hormones in 1979, had chest surgery in 1980, and thereafter started living full-time as a man. At this point, he threw himself even more fully into transgender community activism. He volunteered as the first FTM peer counselor at the Janus Information Facility, a private organization that took over the Erickson Educational Foundation's transgender information and referral activities after the NTCU folded, and which had changed its name to the Transsexual Counseling Service shortly before it went out of business. As a result, Sullivan found himself in contact with a multitude of gender-questioning people who had been assigned female at birth. Sullivan simultaneously redoubled his efforts as a community-based historian. He gathered the vignettes he had published throughout the years in GPU News and incorporated them into the guidebook he developed based off his work as Janus, Information for the Female-to-Male Cross-Dresser and Transsexual, which remained the go-to self-help book for trans men well into the 1990s. In 1986, Sullivan became a founding member and newsletter editor of the Gay and Lesbian Historical Society, now the LGBT Historical Society, whose archives comprise one of the best collections of material on gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender history anywhere in the world. As a result of Sullivan's early involvement, the organization's transgender holdings are particularly rich. Sullivan also started work on a book-length biography of Jack B. Garland, the 19th century San Franciscan, also known as Babe Bean, who had been born female, but who lived as a man in the Tenderloin. Sullivan noted that Garland eroticized his relationships with the young men he met in the Tenderloin, and that he helped them sell out by offering food, shelter, and gifts of money. Seeing antecedents to his own trans-gay identity, in his book published in 1991, Sullivan argued that contrary to the then prevailing wisdom in gay and feminist scholarship, Garland did not live as a man to escape the conventional limitations of womanhood, but rather because of his identification as a man and his homoerotic attraction to other men. In 1986, while Sullivan was working to establish the GLBT archives in San Francisco, he also organized the second FTM-only support and education organization in the United States, called simply FTM. The organizations held monthly FTM gatherings, featuring educational programs and opportunities to socialize, and also published the FTM newsletter, which quickly became the leading sources of information in the nation for female-to-male issues. Because of Sullivan's leadership role in his own gay identity, the San Francisco FTM group always attracted a sexually diverse membership and avoided many of the divisions over sexual orientation that had plagued similar MTF organizations since the 1960s. This openness was reflected in the newsletter's editorial slant and helped shape the group's sensibilities in the community of trans men that started blossoming in the 1980s with Sullivan's support. The organization Sullivan founded became FTM International, now the oldest continuing FTM group in the world. The San Francisco chapter became known as the Lou Sullivan Society, which is now an independent web-based resource for trans men in the Bay Area. Lou Sullivan's life was cut tragically short by an opportunistic illness contracted as a result of HIV infection. Lou did not live up to the promiscuous stereotype of a gay man in San Francisco in the 1980s, but he did visit gay sex clubs after having his chest surgery in 1980. And in 1985, in an experimental phase, he dated trans women who supported themselves through commercial sex work at a Tenderloin bar called the Black Rose. Other than those brief episodes of sexual adventurousness, Sullivan could count his long-term sex partners on one hand. Wherever and however it was that Lou became infected, he remained asymptomatic until 1986, when complications from the genital surgery he had finally decided to pursue stressed his immune system. In the course of his post-surgical recovery, Sullivan developed pneumocystis, I don't know how to pronounce that, some kind of pneumonia, an especially virulent form of pneumonia closely associated with AIDS. At the time his diagnosis was confirmed, survival rates for people with AIDS averaged somewhere in the vicinity of 2 years. Sullivan survived for 5 in reasonably good health until the very end. In his final years, he participated in AIDS drug trials, finished his book on Jack Garland, and continued to nurture the FTM group in the Historical Society. Sullivan's final campaign, however, was to pursue HBIGDA members, and the committee revising the definition of GID for the next edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual to drop homosexual orientation as a contraindication in the diagnostic criteria, which was based on the assumption that homosexual transgender people did not exist. Sullivan did not live to see that his changes take place in 1994, but he took comfort in knowing that his efforts were contributing to a revision of the sexological literature. In one of his journal entries after his AIDS diagnosis, Lou mused about writing to the staff of the Stanford Gender Dysphoria program to say, "You told me I couldn't live as a gay man, but now I'm going to die like one." He left this life surrounded by friends and family on March 6, 1991, just as a new phase of transgender history was beginning to erupt. And now we're on to Chapter 5, called The Millennial Wave. Are you still awake? Hardly. Oh God, you're cute. Okay. The Millennial Wave. The tremendous burst of new transgender activism that began around 1990 came on the heels of a generally... what is that word? My brain is messing up. Dispiriting decade. Dispiriting decade or two in which transgender people made only small, erratic strides towards a better collective existence. After years of court rulings in which discrimination against transsexuals was found not to be illegal under Title V of the Civil Rights Act, most notably in the Supreme Court case, Ulane v. Eastern Airlines, the 1989 decision in the Price Waterhouse v. Hopkins, which held sex stereotyping to be illegal after the well-known accounting firm denied a partnership to Anns Hopkins for being too masculine, opened up important lines of argumentation for trans rights in the decades ahead. The Americans with Disabilities Act, passed in 1990, could have been interpreted as covering transgender people who, after all, were considered to have an officially recognized psychopathological disability, except for the fact that transsexualism was specifically exempted from coverage. A number of states had come to recognize legal change of sex on birth certificates, change of name and gender on driver's licenses, and the rights of post-operative transsexuals to marry in their current gender by the 1990s. A few, Illinois, Arizona, and Louisiana, had done so as early as the 1960s. Several others, Hawaii, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, and Iowa, had followed suit in the 1970s, and several more, Colorado, Arkansas, Georgia, Missouri, New Mexico, Oregon, Utah, Wisconsin, and the District of Columbia had done so by the 1980s. In addition, 3 municipalities, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Seattle, Washington, had enacted human and civil rights protections for transgender people before the end of the 1980s. The Southern California chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union had formed the Transsexual Rights Committee in 1980, which had won a few modest victories pertaining to the treatment of trans people by the Veterans Administration, the California prison system, and the government-funded vocational rehabilitation programs, but the committee disbanded around 1983. Althea Garrison was revealed as the first trans person to have been elected to a state legislature when she won a seat in the Massachusetts State House in 1992. She was publicly outed 2 days later, effectively ending her political career. Transgender-related policy, legislative, and electoral victories were few and far between until the 1990s. A few transgender organizations and service agencies had soldiared. What is this word? Oh, sorry, that was kind of loud. There's a hyphen in between the SOL and the diered of the word soldiered, and my brain did not understand it. A few transgender organizations and service agencies had soldiered on to the bleakest stretches of the 1970s and 1980s. The oldest ongoing transgender gathering in the nation, Fantasia Fair, met in Provincetown, Massachusetts in 1975 under the leadership of Ari Kane, a transgender mental health educator who that same year also founded the Outreach Institute of Gender Studies. The week-long Fantasia Fair, a retreat initially geared towards male-to-female cross-dressers, had tried with some success to broaden its appeal to transsexuals and transmasculine people in recent years. Boston's transgender community also spawned the International Foundation for Gender Education in 1987. Like Fantasia Fair, it initially focused on the needs and interests of MTF cross-dressers, but aimed for an increasingly general transgender constituency during the course of its existence. IFGE's magazine Tapestry was once the most widely circulating transgender publication in the United States. The Janus Information Facility, which had taken over the education and outreach work of the Erickson Education Foundation in the mid-1970s, itself ceased operations in the mid-1980s and transferred its mission to two stalwarts of the transgender community, Jude Patton and Joanna Clark, who ran the cryptically named Transsexual Information Clearinghouse, J2PC, derived from the initials of their names, in San Juan, Capistrano, California. Such small-scale, largely self-financed, homegrown resources, which enjoyed a few years of influence and significance before sinking beneath the waves of time, characterized the bulk of transgender community organizations into and even beyond the 1990s. But just as transgender social justice activism made gains in the 1960s when transgender issues resonated with larger cultural shifts related to the rise of feminism, the war in Vietnam, sexual liberation, and youth countercultures, the transgender movement bolted forward again in the early 1990s for reasons having little to do directly with transgender issues. As suggested earlier, a variety of novel historical factors, the new political concept of queerness, the AIDS epidemic, and the rapid development of internet, the end of the Cold War, and the maturation of the first post-baby boomer generation, and the calendrical millennial turn all played their parts in revitalizing transgender politics in the last decade of the 20th century. The wave of change that began at that time continued for a quarter century. The new transgender and queer feminist theory. Around 1990, transgender issues experienced a rapid evolution and expansion. Indeed, it's about this time that the word transgender first started to acquire its current definition as a catch-all term for all non-normative forms of gender expression and identity. Variants of the word have been popping up since the early 1960s in both sexological literature and male cross-dresser communities, where words such as transgenderal, transgenderist, and transgenderism were used by people like Ari Kane and Virginia Prince to describe individuals, such as themselves, who occupied a different gender category from either transvestites or transsexuals. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, a transgenderist was most likely somebody born with a penis and who kept it in spite of living societally as a woman. Trans activist Holly Boswell made an important contribution towards the expansion of the term with her 1991 article, The Transgender Alternative, published in the community-based journal Chrysalis Quarterly, which claimed transgender was a word that encompasses the whole spectrum of gender identity and lumps together rather than splits apart many subgroups within a large, heterogeneous set of communities. Leslie Feinberg gave this expansive sense of transgender a political charge with their influential 1992 pamphlet, Transgender Liberation, a movement whose time has come. Feinberg, who had begun transitioning from female to male in the 1980s before deciding to live again as a masculine woman with some surgical body alterations, became one of the chief architects of the new transgender sensibility. As I don't know how to read this because it's using this person's pronouns as S/H. So I'm just going to say as they. I don't know how to say that. As they struggled to define and occupy a space on the borders and intersections of conventional gender categories. Their pamphlet took a Marxist approach to the question of the social, political, and economic oppression of non-normative expressions of gender, and they called for a transgender movement that would link many struggles against specific gender-based oppressions together into one radical movement. Feinberg's autobiographically grounded novel, Stone Butch Blues in 1991, communicated the emotional flavor of her transgender vision to a large and appreciative international audience. Yet another contribution to the redefinition of transgender came in the form of a 1992 academic article by Sandy Stone, The Empire Strikes Back, a post-transsexual manifesto. Stone, who had first gained notoriety in transgender circles as the male-to-female transsexual recording engineer who inspired Janice Raymond to lead a boycott of the all-woman Olivia Records collective, had since gotten a PhD in cultural studies, and she made brilliant use of some of the new theories of gender just then beginning to circulate in the academy, which she used to help shift the old trans-exclusionary feminist debates into a productive new register. In calling for post-transsexual theorizing, capable of reframing the common narratives through which trans people were marginalized, Stone helped give the nascent transgender movement an intellectual as well as a political agenda. There is more than one intellectual genealogy of what came to be called queer studies. One story has it emerging from the work of literary critics Eve Kosofsky, Sedgwick, and Michael Moon at Duke University. Stone, however, was more grounded in the version of queer feminism that blossomed in Santa Cruz, where she earned her PhD at the University of California while studying under feminist science studies scholar Donna Haraway. West Coast queer theory was more indebted to the feminists of color, primarily the writers to the anthology This Bridge Called My Back, and most especially to Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands / La Frontera, The New Mestiza. Two crucial insights in this body of work were to be found in its intersectional analyses of race, class, gender, sexuality, oppressions, no one of which could be privileged over the others in the lives of the women writing about their situations, and in its attention to hybridity. White feminism often unconsciously claimed its moral strength based on some concept of purity, notably, especially in the first wave, some notion of female sexual purity, but also, more abstractly, in the second wave, on the idea of an essential womanhood to be recovered or restored from the taint of patriarchal pollution. In contrast, Anzaldua's brain of feminism valued the power to be found in being mixed, in crossing borders, and having no one clear category to fit into, of being essentially impure. Haraway drew on this evolving frame of reference in her famous Cyborg Manifesto, which described a post-gender world of technocultural bodies, and added machine/human and animal/human to the kinds of boundary and mixing questions with which feminism should be concerned. Stone's post-transsexual manifesto, attentive as it was to technologically altered transgender bodies, was deeply influenced by Haraway's approach to the intersectionality of gender, embodiment, and technology. However, it also drew from another new way of thinking about gender than being explored by another feminist faculty member at the University of California, Santa Cruz, Teresa de Loredes, who coined the term queer studies for a conference she organized under that name in Santa Cruz in 1991. The new queer version of gender espoused by de Loredes and other like-minded feminist scholars, which de Loredes laid out most succinctly in her essays, Technologies of Gender, discarded the older feminist idea that gender was merely repressive, that it was only a system for holding women down, turning them into second-class citizens, exploiting their labor, and controlling their reproductive capacities. Without denying that gender systems indeed produce systematic inequalities for women, the new queer take on gender also talked about gender's productive power, how woman was also a cultural or linguistic site or location that its occupants identified themselves with, understood themselves through, and acted from. The new queer feminism drew heavily from French philosophers Michel Foucault. I know that's not how you pronounce it in French. His concept of social powers as decentralized and distributed rather than flowing from a single source. That is, that each of us have a power particular to our situation, and that power is not just something vested up there, somewhere in the law, or the military, or capital, or the patriarchy. Queer feminism imagined the status woman as not simply a condition of victimization to be escaped from, and it reconceptualized gender as a network of relations of power that, like language, we don't ever get outside, but always express ourselves through and work within. A situation that gives feminist women a dual vision and split subjectivity. Sometimes womanhood is a binding in place that needs to be resisted and worked against, and sometimes, De Loretta said, women want womanhood to stick to them like a wet silk dress. Oh my god, I'm tired. How you holding up, Angel? Angel, baby, are you there? It's nice to hear you fell asleep because I don't know how much longer I could have read. I'll read more to you tomorrow. I enjoy talking to you. But I enjoy talking to you a little bit more when you're awake. Okay, baby. I love you. And I will talk to you tomorrow. Okay. I'm gonna kiss the phone. Love you.